The school roof in Ségou was 2 flights of cracked cement and 1 stubborn iron hatch away from ordinary life. Aminata learned the dance of that hatch by heart. Push, lift, hip, breathe. Dust rose like prayer smoke each time, and the night arrived like a velvet shawl flung over the shoulders of the town. Up here the engines softened, the goats grew philosophical, and the Niger drifted darkly, stitched with lanterns. She lay on the warm concrete, skirt tucked under her, a notebook open to a page inked with constellations she named in Bambara and in her own language of memory, the calabash, the drummer's hands, the promise. Stars trembled as if they were trying not to laugh at some private joke the sky had told them. Bakary arrived with a quiet that felt like care. He carried a battered transistor radio, a bottle of cold bissap wrapped in cloth, and the green scent of motorcycle grease from his uncle's workshop. "I he whispered, "thank you, for leaving the hatch unlatched." She answered, "I for bringing the night with him." They didn't touch yet, but their nearness had weight, the kind that makes a breath fall deeper into the chest. He pointed at a bright bead above the horizon. "Sira," he said, not the astronomer's word but his grandmother's, the guide star that holds a traveler's feet to the path. They told stories the way Malians have always told stories, with hands and eyes and pauses that ring like bells. Hers were full of women who stitched entire villages together with thread made from river light. His were full of boys who won races barefoot and learned to cook jollof that made elders cry. Somewhere between a girl saved by a hyena's laugh and a boy who traded his reed flute for courage, their voices slowed, and silence became a third person with them, listening. When he finally took her hand, it was just a touch, as light as dew on millet, but in her palm she felt the shape of a future. The radio clicked on. A chorus spilled silver notes. The stars leaned closer. By day, Aminata was the daughter who rose before the call to prayer to sweep the courtyard and fetch water, who took notes for classmates and laughed softly so teachers wouldn't notice. By night she became a cartographer of the sky. She mapped Orion into the blacksmith, the Pleiades into the bracelet, traced lines others couldn't see. Her father teased her gently, "You'll marry a star and forget to cook," and her mother hid a proud smile under a scarf. The town said roof visits were for naughty boys and sleep, but on that concrete rectangle above algebra and chalk, she and Bakary learned another syllabus. The language of hush, of warmth in the wind, of listening so closely to a person that the world arrived in better focus. Bakary spent afternoons elbow-deep in engines, coaxing scooters and battered Peugeots to forgive their owners. The workshop smelled of oil and rain on hot tin. His uncle taught him the economy of effort: twist, listen, tighten, but it was Aminata who taught him the luxury of lingering. "Tell it like a tale," she would say when he described a carburetor. Suddenly even the smallest bolt had a beginning, middle, and end. Sometimes he'd wipe his hands, look up at the thin blue noon, and imagine it as a pale rehearsal for the real performance that came after sunset. He brought her stories like gifts, wrapped in jokes, tied with quiet awe. The first time their fingers stayed twined for more than a breath, a slow heat climbed Aminata's throat, not from shame but from the dignity of being chosen. She leaned her head to his shoulder, and he tilted his cheek so his skin brushed her hairline. If anyone had climbed the ladder, they would have found 2 students pretending to count constellations, faces tilted high, but in truth they were learning the star map under each other's skin. The freckle above her left eyebrow, the scar on his wrist from falling out of a mango tree, the way her breaths deepened when he whispered her name, Aminata, as if it were a prayer with a smile at the end. Ségou's harmattan came soft that week, a faint veil that turned the sun into a coin and sanded edges off voices. The school held a poetry night, chalk dust and drumskins in the same hall, and Aminata read a piece about a girl who stitched silence into sails and crossed a river of worry. People clapped politely, Bakary clapped like he was in on a secret. Afterward, they slipped away to the roof, where a slow wind moved across the concrete like a blessing. "What do you want?" he asked, light as rain. "The kind of life that lets me name things," she answered. "You?" He touched his radio. "A job that pays in mornings and evenings, not just money." They made a promise that wasn't a promise, because neither of them believed in words as cages. It was more like a vow shaped from breath, to meet on the roof every clear night they could, to say the truth even when it trembled, to let the stars be the witness that asked no questions and never forgot. When he touched her chin, she closed her eyes, and when he kissed her, it was new but sure, a conversation between warmth and wonder. He tasted of bissap and hope. She smelled of clean cotton and shea. They parted an inch and really looked, 2 portraits painted by a single lamp. They lay on their sides and made up a constellation only they would know. The griot's lantern, she named it, a line of faint stars curling toward a brighter one, This one is the heart that refuses to be quiet. He laughed softly. It looks like a wrench to me. Then it is a wrench that loosens fear, she countered. He grew sober. If things change, he said and didn't finish. The radio crackled. A chorus slipped into a singer's voice that carried the river's patience. Things always change, Aminata replied, but we choose how we carry them. Below, a scooter backfired. Above, a meteor scratched the sky and was gone, leaving nothing but the certainty that it had been there. The uncle who smelled of gasoline and laughter brought news wrapped in pride. A friend in Bamako needed a reliable young man at a bigger garage, with better pay and a path that might lead to more. Bamako, the word rang bright and dangerous like a bell in a market at noon. Bakary's mother ululated and pressed her palms to his cheeks. His uncle slapped his back until both of them glowed. At dusk, the river threw copper light across the water as he climbed to the roof with steps that felt borrowed. Aminata was already there, her notebook closed, palms flat on the concrete as if the roof might lift. They spoke as if the night were a courtroom and they were both lawyers and judges and witnesses. He described the city the way he imagined it. Bridges lit like strings of prayer beads, music bursting through doorways, work that respected a man's quick mind and stronger hands. She described what the city would ask for: his time, his breath, his nights. Her voice didn't shake, but it pulled the syllables through something tender. The stars will still be there, he said, his certainty only slightly thinner than usual. So will we, she answered, and in that moment she knew hope can be a kind of courage and courage a kind of devotion. They kissed long and unhurried, as if each touch could be folded and stored, to be unfolded in the far city when lights made a counterfeit sky. His hand pressed to the small of her back, hers drew slow circles at the base of his neck. Nothing about it was rushed or careless. Between kisses they spoke little sentences that were more like threads than words. Write me, look for the lantern star, eat well, don't forget the stories, don't forget your hands. When they finally parted, their foreheads leaned together like two roofs touching. Far away a muezzin called, and grief and gratitude braided inside them, tight and bright as new rope. The bus to Bamako left before dawn. The depot smelled of diesel and cola nuts, of tears swallowed quickly so they wouldn't stain the morning. Aminata stood outside the chain-link fence with a scarf over her hair and a pebble in her pocket she'd polished smooth while waiting. Bakary pressed his palm to the fence. She matched it, skin to skin through the small diamond. He gave her the radio, for the music between us, and she gave him her notebook, for the names of the stars. They didn't say goodbye. They said, NBSE, we can do this, and let the bus take what it must take. Bamako rose before him like a shout. Bridges arced, mopeds stitched the avenues, music argued with its own echo. The garage was bigger, the engines larger, the work faster. He learned to read the city by the way its heat pooled in alleys, by how laughter moved in waves across stalls, by which tea seller finished a pour with the foam of a small miracle. At night, he climbed the narrow stairs to the roof of his rented room. The city offered a sky bruised by neon and dust, but if he squinted, he could still find their griot's lantern, that lantern-turned heart that they alone knew. He whispered her name into the air and waited for the wind to acknowledge receipt. In Ségou, Aminata moved through days that had been sharpened. She taught her younger brothers constellations and fractions, stirred to with steady wrists, and read her own poems under a tree whose shade knew both laughter and quiet. When the night came, she climbed the school ladder and lay on the roof like a page waiting for ink. She tuned the radio, and when a Cora found a melody that stretched like river light, she let it pour through her. Their connection was not fragile, it was tensile. She felt him when a gust touched her cheek. He felt her when the city's noise thinned and a single star snagged his breath. They were not together, yet the night braided them with a patience that didn't flaunt itself. And when the first letter arrived, creased, scented faintly of oil and mint, his handwriting like a road learning to be straight, she smiled at the moon as if it had kept its side of the bargain. The first week separated them into two clocks that almost matched. In Ségou, Aminata opened Bakary's letter on the roof and read by moon silver. He wrote of Bamako's morning traffic that moved like a herd with horns of light, of a tea seller who poured from too high and made bubbles like miracles, of the garage's big-bellied engines that roared then surrendered. Between those scenes he slipped something soft, the way his chest felt hollow without her, the ache that wasn't pain but proof. She traced each sentence as if it were a path returning to her door. Her reply overflowed the margins. She told him how the Niger wore the color of pewter at noon and of her mother's groundnuts roasting like small suns. She confessed she had started naming new constellations and saved one just for them. 2 faint stars and a bright one, a triangle she called the return ticket. When the harmattan smeared the sky, she held back tears until the ladder, then gave them to the roof. If anyone asked, the wind had simply changed direction. At night they tuned their separate skies to the same hour. She set the radio low so the chorus sounded like water flowing under a door. He cupped his palms to shield a cheap candle stub from the city's breeze. Sometimes calls connected and their words arrived like birds. Sometimes the line clicked and hissed and cut, and all they could do was hold the phone like a warm stone and wait for courage to refill. On those nights they sent voice notes, not poetry, just breath and the sound of a room, that hum of presence that said, "I am here. Stay." Harmattan arrived in earnest, shocking the world. In the garage, dust turned to paste on Bakary's neck. He wiped his brow with a red cloth and laughed to keep from cursing. The city coughed and adjusted. When power failed, he finished a repair in the amber light of a neighbor's kiosk, legends crisscrossing the street with shadows. On the roof later, his candle guttered, then steadied. He found the griot's lantern and whispered a greeting like a code word. He recorded a message for Aminata, voice rough, heart unhidden. "When the dust goes, I'll still be here. When the dust stays, I'll be here anyway." In Ségou the air tasted like ground bone, and Aminata tied a scarf over her mouth. Classrooms thinned, chores thickened. She recited multiplication tables to her brothers while her mother rubbed Shay into cracking knuckles. At night she climbed and lay flat so the wind passed over. The stars were fewer, but the ones that remained felt loyal, stubborn points insisting on their own brightness. She played his voice note and pictured his hands, the left with the mango tree scar, the right steady on a stubborn bolt. The roof was stingy with comfort. She took what it gave and made more with memory. They invented a ritual to outweigh distance. At exactly 9:30, they would close their eyes and picture the other's forehead against theirs. They never missed it, not when a customer argued over a price, not when her father needed medicine, not when a storm threatened to drag the roof into the river. At 9:30, presence became a discipline. It didn't heal everything, but it made grief manageable, like a bucket you could lift together. One afternoon a jack slipped. The Peugeot lurched, caught, then slammed down just enough to pinch Bakary's knuckles between metal and mercy. Pain flashed white. His uncle swore softly and wrapped the hand in a clean rag before driving him to a clinic that smelled of bleach and hope. "No bones broken," the nurse said, "but muscles must rest." The bandage turned his dominant hand into a clumsy bird. He laughed it off at the garage. He did not laugh alone on the stairwell where the city's noise climbed like heat. He couldn't write. He tried dictating to a friend, but the words came out stiff. He stood on the roof and recorded instead. "I thought my hands were the point," he said, voice low. "Turns out they are just the translators. The point is what I carry for you." He described the pain without decoration and the small kindnesses. How the tea seller refused payment, how his uncle fixed the strap of his bag, how a little boy with a runny nose offered a torn sticker of a star. Aminata listened twice. Then she wrote him a letter that was mostly instructions for gentleness, dressed up as a story. A griot breaks a string in the middle of a song. He apologizes to the village, then plays with the remaining notes until everyone hears something new. "You are not your hurt," she wrote. "You are the musician who will find another way." On the roof she practiced patience by tracing the same constellation over and over, a quiet prayer. Let him heal where no one can see, let his courage rest without guilt. Cousin Fanta visited from Bamako with a suitcase of city gossip that smelled faintly of perfume. She told Aminata about dancers in bright skirts who swirled like spun sugar and young men who believed eyes were invitations. "Bakary is handsome," Fanta added, as if Aminata had never noticed. The words pricked then burned. That night the roof felt crowded with shadows and borrowed heels. Jealousy is a small animal. It hides well until it bites. Aminata pressed her palms flat to the concrete, grounding herself in something real. She called him, ready to be brave and not dramatic. The line popped then held. "Say it," he urged gently. She did, her fear that the city would give him a better version of everything, including love. He listened as if her doubts were not enemies but guests to be fed and sent home politely. "Nothing I want is better than you," he said. "It is just different, and different isn't an upgrade, it's a direction." She breathed out a laugh that tasted of salt and relief. He confessed he had been afraid too, that she would outgrow him the way a poem outgrows a first draft. They healed the rumor with a remedy of habits. On Sundays they shared one thing they were tempted by and one thing they refused. He admitted the thrill of being noticed by a manager who promised quick advancement if he stayed late too often. He vowed to guard their time. She admitted the safety of pretending she didn't want much. She vowed to speak her wants. They ended the call in matched silence, the kind that felt earned. A traveling teacher announced a student poetry contest. Prize money small but pride enormous. Aminata wrote about roofs, plural, and the people who climbed them carrying their tender, stubborn hopes. She didn't name him, she didn't have to. The lines moved like footsteps up a ladder. At the community hall, she read in a voice that shook for 3 words, then anchored. Applause rose like kettle steam. She won a ribbon and a stack of notebooks and a shout-out on the local radio. In Bamako, Bakary was changing a fan belt when the radio behind the counter crackled and a girl's voice filled the garage. Soft, certain, familiar. He froze, wrench in hand, mouth open. The foreman grinned. "Your friend?" Bakary nodded without moving his eyes. Customers paid slower to prolong the song of it. When the poem ended, he stepped outside and let the city blur. For once, the distance felt like a drum he could dance with. That night on the roof he asked her to read the poem again just for him. She did, and after the last word they remained in the space it made. Sometimes language can be a bridge built fast and true. He told her the garage men now called him Poet, half mocking, half approving. She liked the nickname so much she stitched it into the hem of his name. Poet Bakary, she teased. Mechanic Aminata, he teased back, and both titles felt possible because love had made them larger. When his uncle fell sick with a fever that clung, responsibility climbed into Bakary's lap and sat heavy. He covered shifts, juggled orders, took the night bus to deliver a part when a customer's patience ran out. He slept in pockets, the city's hum a lullaby he didn't like. The bandage was gone, but his hands still complained when the weather shifted. He didn't admit any of that at first, he just sounded thinner at 9:30. Aminata noticed the hollows in his sentences. She widened hers to make room. She organized her father's medicines, managed the market bargaining, took her brother's homework without sighing, then climbed to the roof with a thermos of mint tea and the determination to be gentle with both of them. "Rest while I talk," she told him one night. She spent 10 minutes describing a lizard on the courtyard wall, pausing for his breath to steady. Another night she listed small victories like beads. A perfect chapati, a joke that made her teacher snort, a cloud that looked like a sleeping lion. The world did not get easier, but they grew artful at carrying its weight together. He learned to say no to 1 extra shift each week. She learned to accept help from a neighbor without measuring debts. Their 9:30 ritual became not just romance but triage, a place to set down the day's sharp edges. When his uncle's fever finally broke, relief arrived so sudden that Bakary sat on the roof and cried like a boy. It did not diminish him. It made space for joy to return with less suspicion. Payday came with a modest swell of pride. Bakary walked the market, fingers grazing bowls of beads that flashed like small planets. He chose a bracelet of blue and brass, the colors of evening with a hint of sunrise, and wrapped it in newspaper that had once declared something important and now protected something intimate. He shipped it with a note, "For your wrist that points at the stars." At the post office he stood a little taller, as if sending a gift wrote his name in a new, confident script. The package arrived on a Thursday, and Aminata didn't open it until the roof. She slid the bracelet on and let the metal warm against her pulse. In return she folded a scarf she had dyed with indigo and onion skins, the pattern accidental and perfect, like constellations after rain. She tucked it around a bar of soap she had perfumed with cloves and orange peel and wrote, "For your neck that bends toward hard work, for your days that need soft edges." The gifts became a kind of shorthand. When she wore the bracelet, she felt less alone in rooms that didn't know her heart. When he tied the scarf, the city's noise lost its right to boss him. They didn't need expensive things, they needed reminders that the other existed in the same world at the same time. Even when delivery was slow and tracking numbers made no sense, the packages found their way, as if guided by that stubborn star they had named together. The first storms of the season arrived like a rumor that turned to fact. In Bamako, rain hammered corrugated roofs until conversations became mime. A gutter choked, then spilled, the alley became a river in a hurry. At the garage they hauled tires like life rings and pushed a car by hand to higher ground, laughter slicing fear into manageable pieces. In the commotion, a toolbox slid and could have crushed a boy's foot. Bakary yanked him back in time, heart sprinting. By the time the water receded, everyone was drenched and trembling and alive. He called her with rain still tapping metal behind him. "We almost lost Kader," he said, voice shaking now that it was safe to shake. She listened until the adrenaline drained and left a human being. "You are allowed to be afraid," she told him. "It means your courage is working." Later she imagined the alley, the improvised heroism, the tough men with soft eyes. On the roof, the Niger answered the storm with a full belly and news stories on its surface. In the days that followed, the garage became a small school of preparedness. They built a shelf higher than the last one and practiced the jack twice. "Next time we know," the foreman said, tapping Bakary's shoulder. "Next time is a phrase that can curse or bless." They took it as a blessing. At 9:30 their ritual felt even more sacred. The stars were late some nights, but they arrived like forgiven friends. Permission to visit did not fall from the sky. Bakary bargained with shifts, promised to cover a double later, tucked bills into a jar, and bought a bus ticket that smelled of dust and possibility. He rode through a landscape he loved so much it hurt. Baobabs like elders, fields like quilts, the river like a sentence that refused to end. When Ségou's depot appeared, he stepped onto ground that remembered him. He did not go home first. He climbed. Aminata was already on the roof because of course she was. The hatch creaked the way it always had, and suddenly all the metaphors in their letters were unnecessary. They didn't rush. They approached like people who had learned patience. Then their arms found their way around each other and there it was. The soft crash of reunion, the wordless yes. They laughed because they were breathing the same air and because laughter is the body's way of confirming joy. When they finally kissed, it was not fireworks, it was a long drink of water after a good kind of thirst. They spread a cloth and ate what she had brought. Fried plantains still warm, peanuts that snapped in their teeth, bissap that dyed their tongues. He told her stories he had already told, and she wanted to hear them again from his moving mouth. She showed him the bracelet on her wrist. He touched it as if confirming a map. Above, the griot's lantern shone with a modest brightness as if proud of them. They stayed until the horizon considered dawn, until the first rooster reminded them that love must share space with morning. The visit was brief, grown life keeps receipts. But before he returned to the city, they made a plan that wasn't just hope in costume. Aminata applied for a teaching assistant program in Bamako, the kind that paid a small stipend and liked candidates who could turn numbers into narratives. She had the grades, she had the poem, she had a reason that made the committee smile. Bakary spoke with the garage owner about formal training, night classes that would turn skill into certificate. "You are already useful," the man said. "Let's make you official." On their last night they climbed the roof and brought paper. They listed what distance had already taught them, how to tell the truth before it calcified into silence, how to make rituals out of time zones, how to combine pride and tenderness without spillage. They wrote down 3 promises and signed their names with full stops, not exclamation points. 1. To keep learning the constellations and the parts of each other that still surprised them. 2. To treat jealousy and exhaustion like weather, real, uncomfortable, and not permanent. 3. To let the sky be their place even when walls changed. The bus hissed, the city waited, the river kept moving, and the stars did what stars do, burned from impossible distances and made themselves visible anyway. He boarded with her scarf around his neck, she waved with his bracelet catching early light. They had not beaten distance like a villain. They had made it into a bridge with planks that needed regular repair. That work felt holy, not glamorous. That night at 9:30, he on a Bamako roof and she on the school's, they pressed their foreheads to air that was strangely the same and whispered the word they had been saying all along. Here.